And then when you can, or when you feel comfortable enough to, the fierce self-compassion is really standing up and finding your voice and finding ways to perhaps change how we are being heard or not heard, how we're being seen or not seen.
Welcome to Sensitive Stories. This episode is for educational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for treatment with a mental health or medical professional. Let's dive in.
So Nadine, could you start off by telling us your HSP Discovery story, how or when you realized that you're a highly sensitive person?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I wish I could pinpoint and say there was a moment. It wasn't a moment, it was reactions by others that told me, because especially by my mother. So, what would happen is that when we moved from Canada to the US, and my parents were born and raised in Haiti, studied in Paris, where I was born. And because of the dictatorship, they couldn't return to Haiti. So we were immigrants in Canada first, and that's where I learned English, and then in the US. So we lived in an area just outside of New York and in Connecticut. And at that time, there was a lot of blaming of AIDS on Haitians. And in fact, the Red Cross did not let Haitians donate blood because of that. So there was a lot of bullying that went on. And my brother handled it through humor. That was his way of doing it. But I, being the sensitive person that I was, would go home and tell my mother, and I'd be very upset. The words would remain with me, the emotions. It felt as if it was sinking into the core of my being. And my mother would say, don't be so sensitive. There are going to be people like that in the world, and they are ignorant, and you're past. And she had taught us all about Haiti and all about Haiti's history. So we felt pride in being Haitian, but being insulted and being mocked and taunted, it stayed with me. And it was my mother's reaction that made me realize, oh, wait, yeah, it's staying with me, but it doesn't stay with them in the same way. Somehow they're able to shake it off or whatever. And I'm not like that. So I realized I was a little more like my father, who it's hard to be a sensitive man in any culture. But I realized because the way he listened to music, the way he took in a sunset, the way he appreciated beauty, there was a sensitivity to him that he probably had to hide. So I learned about being highly sensitive by having someone tell me that it's not good. And I think a lot of people have had that experience at first, thinking this is a flaw. And for many years, I thought of that as a flaw until well into living and really having experience. And when I started writing poetry, more poetry, because I always wrote poetry, but when I really turned to writing poetry, I started to see it as my secret superpower.
Your secret superpower.
Mhm.
Yeah, it is true that we often find our sensitivity in relation to others, and usually it's in that criticism of the sensitivity or needing to tuck it away, sometimes for safety, right?
Yes.
Right.
And I understand that too, because also culturally, I recall an experience where I was working and I was with a group of Haitian farmers, and we were helping them get funding for a sustainability project. And as I was describing or translating or doing something, I just started crying. And the person said, well, you're crying, but we're the ones who should be crying. I just thought, I am not cut out for this work. Because again, like my mother is an example that I keep bringing up, because she did very difficult work with homeless, with children, women who needed help. And she would not cry hearing someone's story. She would be able to hold everything in and find a solution. But I would cry. And so I thought, okay, there it is, that sensitivity.
Yep. You had more to hold in, right? Yeah.
Yes, that's true. But yeah, I realized that there are certain kinds of work that even though I think it's great work to do in the world,
Mhm.
it's not matched to my temperament. And that was
Mm.
a big thing to discover. And I didn't discover that until my 30s.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Were you
Yeah.
doing work at the time where you realized this
Yes.
is not sustainable?
Yes,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
exactly. It was
Mm-hmm.
that work of I was helping match grant makers with organizations that
Mm-hmm.
were grassroots, that were dedicated to the environment, to sustainability. So I loved the actual work that I was doing,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of it was work where you would find yourself in these situations facing
Yeah.
very difficult stories. And also, I didn't know at the time that I had several, what we could call now, invisible disabilities. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know that I had endometriosis. I
Yes.
didn't know that I had fibromyalgia. And I didn't know that I had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
Oh, yes.
So there was a lot of pain going on, and I didn't realize the reasons for it. So, on top of the sensitivity, there were chronic pain conditions.
Yes, right. And feeling those at, I imagine, such a deep level and yet still
Yes.
needing to persevere. And all of
Yes.
those things, endometriosis, Ehlers-Danlos, fibromyalgia, a lot of sensitive
Yes.
folks tend to have these invisible
Yes.
illnesses and are
They
suffering
do.
greatly. Yeah,
I
but
have
can't talk
seen
about it.
that. You know
Yeah.
how happy I was that Michelle Obama mentioned menstrual cramps in her
Yes.
speech? It was
Yes.
just, yes, thank you for
Yes.
naming things that we usually do not want to name in public or
Mm-hmm.
feel ashamed of. And I remember being 13 thinking, this is so painful.
Yes.
But when I shared it with my mother, she said, well, that's normal. It'll get better, that kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
it didn't get better. So,
Right.
and it remained undiagnosed for a long time. And
Mm-hmm.
again, that's something that happens to many women, but especially women of color.
Exactly. Yes. Right. Suffering in silence.
Or if, the famous Zora Neale Hurston quote, if you're in pain, but you stay silent, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it.
Yes. Yes.
That's
Uh-huh.
a quote that hits me,
Yes. That's so
because
powerful.
yeah, it is powerful. And
Mm-hmm.
thinking about her life and the example she was, that's something that I've learned not to stay silent. But in the
Mm-hmm.
past, I would try to be very stoic and I didn't describe what was painful.
Mm-hmm.
I internalized it, and that
Mm-hmm.
probably amplified the pain.
Absolutely. Right. It starts to compound. You don't ever get a
Mm-hmm.
release
Mm-hmm.
physically or emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot that you were holding within yourself, whether it
Yes.
was your pain, your emotions, even the strengths of your sensitivity. It's a
Yes.
lot to hold. How did you start to switch into expressing? It sounds like there were some switches that you made where you found your
Mm-hmm.
voice and you stepped more into what was aligned. How did you start to make that switch?
It's interesting. I think I made that switch just from being tired of hearing doctors tell me that it was all in my head.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There came a moment, and I remember reading Elaine Scarry, the philosopher, and she talked about other people's pain being very unreachable to most
Mm-hmm.
of us. So when other people are describing pain, we as a whole don't necessarily take that as seriously as our own pain.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, I've been to so many doctors. I had a kind of dossier, or you say file, that was
Mm-hmm.
maybe 200 pages
Mm.
of just trying to figure out the mystery of what was going on.
Yeah.
But there was a point where I think it was a rheumatologist said something, and I said, no, I know it's not all in my head.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that maybe you can't help me, but I am going to find a way to deal with this. And
Yeah.
it was after several very difficult surgeries to deal with the endometriosis. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was after that I really read more. I started to understand more about that, and also fibromyalgia made me
Mm-hmm.
understand my body more. There's nothing like chronic pain to make you look into and try to understand
Mm.
how it functions, how the mind influences the body. So all of it,
Yeah.
again, it
Yeah.
turned me into, I want to learn. And from the learning, I feel like I have a voice.
Yes, you find your voice in that.
Yes,
You have to be your own advocate,
yes, yes,
especially as a woman, especially as a person of color, especially as a sensitive person who feels differently. Yeah, and you hit a limit, especially with pain, right? You can't tolerate that for so
especially.
long.
Well,
Yeah.
and there are stories that, I could go on, but there's just,
Mm-hmm.
it's the summary of it is when I would go alone to see this particular rheumatologist I'm
Mm-hmm.
mentioning because he stands out.
Mm-hmm.
He would treat me one way, and he treated my hairdresser, who was also Black, in the
Okay.
same way, very
Uh-huh.
dismissive, very brusque, very abrupt. Told her that her lupus was something that she could never cure, that she wouldn't be able to manage. It's just
Oh.
very horrible in his approach.
Mm-hmm.
And when my husband came, and my husband is Dutch, so my husband accompanied me, he's Dutch and white, suddenly the entire demeanor of this
Mm.
rheumatologist changed.
No
And
surprise.
that was all I
Mm.
needed to really feel that outrage and speak up.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Was it apparent to you, because I'm sure you know you've been treated in similar ways before this doctor,
Mhm.
maybe not as obvious, but were you already sensing that he's treating me differently, or was it a wake-up
Yes,
call? Yeah, you already knew.
I already sensed it.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Being
of
highly
course.
sensitive,
Yep, you
I
can sense
just
it.
immediately sensed it. I sensed that the things I was saying were being dismissed
Yes.
and that he wasn't really listening, that he had made up
Yeah,
his mind about me
that's it, isn't
before
it?
hearing, yeah, before
Mm-hmm.
fully listening to my story. And
Mm-hmm.
that was infuriating.
Mm-hmm. Well, right. I mean, he's treating you differently. He's not seeing you, the human, the person in front of
Right,
him.
right.
Yes. I'm curious to know what happens next after you have that appointment where your husband's present.
Well, what really happened is that through a series of decisions to get second opinions, to
Mm-hmm.
also work with my OBGYN who had helped me with the endometriosis, to work with a mindfulness therapist,
Mm-hmm.
to do mindfulness MBSR
Oh yeah,
base.
MBS. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I did several sessions of that, the
Mm-hmm.
8 week sessions,
Yes.
and that already helped me because it helped me approach the pain in a different way. So
Yes.
before I was blaming myself for the pain, or I was saying it's something I can't figure out. There's a problem that I'm not figuring out, and
Mm.
that compounded it. But just having the mindful and non-judgmental attitude helped a
Mm-hmm.
lot.
Mm-hmm.
It really helped me. It didn't make the pain go away, but it made the pain much more manageable, especially on the worst days.
Yes. Yeah, MBSR is great for pain relief or pain management, I should say.
Yes, it helps.
Yes.
It
Mm-hmm.
helped me a lot. So
Mm-hmm.
that's part of it, just having
Yeah.
that, having other tools that you can turn to, and
Yes.
more recently, self-compassion, the work
Yes.
of
Kristen
Kristen
Neff?
Neff, exactly.
Yes.
Yes, that
So
has
good.
really helped me a lot because self-compassion isn't necessarily a part of mindfulness-based stress reduction.
Mm-hmm.
It's a small part of it, but what she's done is taken it and really talked about specifically how it can affect women's lives. And she talks about fierce self compassion and
Mm.
tender self compassion and the need for both. And
Yes.
when you need one and when you need the other. So the more I read about it, I actually did an intensive course with her and with Chris Germer, and
Mm-hmm.
that was in the Netherlands. And doing that week helped me immensely. It really helped me have the tool of
Mm-hmm.
self-compassion. Before, the tool was mindfulness, and it's still that, but self-compassion
Mm-hmm.
added another element that's helped me also as a writer, as someone
Mm.
trying to be creative. Yeah.
Yes. I I want to, there's a few layers here that are coming up. One, we haven't talked about fierce versus kind self-compassion on the podcast yet.
Mm,
Do you have an example in your own
yes.
life of the how you differentiate those two?
Yes. Yes.
I'd love to hear.
So one is the tender self-compassion
Mm-hmm.
would be turning toward the pain and saying, so this is what this pain feels like. So you're acknowledging the pain and really, if you can, locating it within the body, and saying, so this is what this pain feels like. So the second step is saying, I'm not alone in feeling this kind of pain. I'm not the only person who has felt this. At this moment, I'm not alone in this.
Yeah.
And the third part of it is saying, what can I do? What small step can I take to help comfort myself at this moment with this kind of pain? So that's tender
Beautiful.
self-compassion. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And she calls that the mother energy, but it can be called many things. And when I think of it in terms of creatives, I think of how Frida Kahlo looked at her pain and
Yeah.
was able to transform and metabolize that into paintings that spoke to other people. But she turned toward her pain and really she told the truth about it, if you want. So you need tender self-compassion just to get through a lot.
Sure.
So I would say that's the basic one that I used before even learning about fierce self-compassion, because that's something that Professor Neff has just introduced and talked about in her most recent book. So that she calls the mama bear. So she has a graphic, and I've used this graphic. So the first is kind of the hugging bear, and the second is the bear sort of growling in a protective way and holding the little cubs under her arm. And it's a kind of compassion. It's still self-compassion because you're caring for yourself. But what you're also doing is providing, if need be, advocating, standing up, and having that energy outward that is a different element to tender self-compassion. So it's kind of, it's that extra step that sometimes it's that extra step, for example, of saying to the rheumatologist, well, I noticed that you treat me differently when my husband is around, and I'd like to know what that's about.
Yeah.
That was self-compassion. I would call it fierce self-compassion, even if it's said
Yes.
politely. So there's the tender self-compassion that is maybe the first step for a lot of people. And then when you can, or when you feel comfortable enough to, the fierce self-compassion is really standing up and finding your voice and finding ways to perhaps change how we are being heard or not heard, how we're being seen or not seen.
Like taking care of self personally, but
Yes,
then also
yes,
advocating out in the world. And
absolutely.
and at first I was like, oh, how does this connect to writing? But I could see it, and I want to hear more about
Yes.
that.
Oh my
Pain is fuel
goodness.
for writing and finding your
Yes.
voice. Yeah, I want to hear more about how this compassion practice fuels your writing.
Yes, the self-compassion for any creative activity, but especially for writing, where perfectionism is often your enemy. So the inner critic in many people who write is such a loud voice,
Yeah.
and it's constant, and if you ever want to finish a book or a long project, it will at some point bedevil you, it's
Yes.
just going to be there. And so the self-compassion is the realization that that's part of the creative process, that people face perfectionism and you're not alone in having to face it, but that you
Yes.
can dim that sound, that inner critic, until it's barely a whisper, and then continue doing what you're doing. And that's especially important when you're in a difficult project and where you start to doubt the value of it. So, for
Yeah.
example, in a novel, I could get to the point where I thought, okay, this is great. But when my mother passed away, I had a lot of trouble returning to the writing.
Sure.
And that's where I had to really exercise a lot of self compassion and say, this is what this feels like. This is what the grieving process holds for me. And this is how writing is going to help me in this particular journey.
Yeah, just kind of
So,
unfold into those emotions, but not get
yes,
caught up in the particulars and it needing to be perfect, but just letting yourself be.
yes. And also
Yeah.
letting it go through and move through my
Yeah.
body, because that was another part that when grief is that strong, as people who experienced that, it almost felt crippling. Like it knocked me
Yes.
to my knees, and there were days I could not get out of bed.
Mm-hmm.
It was very difficult.
It's a big
So
loss
yeah,
to process and to grieve
yes,
through. Yes.
yeah. She inspired my novel. I just wanted to say
I,
that it's
I want
very
to hear.
important. Yeah.
Yes. So you were able. You talked about finding your voice and using the pain as fuel, and it sounds like you did that here as well with the grieving of your mother, not just your
Yes.
physical pain, but your emotional pain. And I would love to hear more about your newest book, When the
It's
Mapou
my
Sings.
first novel, yes, When the
Yes.
Mapou Sings.
Yes.
So, it's my debut novel. And the funny
Yeah.
thing is that you can write a debut novel at any age. So people
Mm-hmm.
think, oh, you have to be in your 20s to be a debut novelist. No, you could
Oh.
be, you have something to say at any age. But
Yes.
the process of writing a novel is one that you learn as you write. And you change as a person as
Mm-hmm.
you're writing the novel. So it's almost like the novel is teaching you how to be in the world. And
Wow.
that's the magical part of it, the part of it that I didn't expect. So I expected it to be difficult. I thought, okay, I'm trying to carry this story and it's in poems, by the way. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
novel in verse. So
Mm.
it wasn't difficult enough for it to be a novel. I have to make it in poems. So, that added challenge, I loved
Sure.
it. But then as I was getting into it, I was like, what am I doing? This is, why did I think this was a good idea?
Mm.
And the more I did it, the more, especially during revision, I noticed that the novel was teaching me. And that is a wonderful moment in
Mm.
any HSP, any person doing creative work, when
Yeah.
your work is teaching you
Mm.
something
That's so beautiful.
unexpected.
Yeah, it's just kind of this cycle of feeding each other. You're feeding
Yes,
the novel's feeding you.
yes, it is.
The
That's
writing
that's a
is the
good way to put
teacher.
it.
Yeah.
Yes, the nurturing, you're
Yeah.
nurturing this. I see it as a plant. I mean, there are lots of metaphors you can use, but
Yeah.
when I didn't nurture my plant, it was
Mm-hmm.
kind of saggy, but it was still there. It was like, give me a little bit of water and I'll be fine.
Right.
And so I was able to return and nurture. And then just that back and forth, I started to see things differently. And I also started to appreciate the quality of patience and the quality of stamina,
Mm.
but the self compassion came back as a tool. And in every way, as you're finishing a big project, you have to exercise, or maybe it's unconscious, but self
Mm-hmm.
compassion will help you get that project finished.
Absolutely kind of softens those perfectionistic tendencies so you can
And that's
birth
it.
this.
And not just that, it's the perfectionist tendencies, but then the inner critic becomes sort of anticipatory
Oh, yes.
criticism. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
people are going to hate this. They're going
Right.
to think this book is, too long and
Mm.
boring. And like all those voices were in my head as I approached
Yeah.
the end of the novel.
Mm-hmm.
But I just thought, okay, I'm sure other people have thought this. This is not the first time that this is going to happen. It won't be the last time. But this is a story I feel only I can write, and I'm going to keep writing it until I finish it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such a big hurdle to get through of anticipating that criticism and then softening it, right? Bringing that
Yes,
universal human experience. Everyone goes through this when they create
everyone goes
something,
through it.
put out in the
Yep,
world. Yes.
absolutely. And if you don't, then either people are lying to you,
Right.
so you're very powerful and they're lying to you. So,
Right, exactly.
but
Could
yeah,
yes. Could you share a little bit more about the story that unfolded in this book?
yes. So the story is really based on three sources.
Hmm.
And the first would be the stories that my mother shared with me about my great grandmother.
Hmm.
And she lived during the American occupation of Haiti.
Mm-hmm.
That was from 1915 to 1934.
Hmm.
So my mother's stories of my great grandmother were just incredible stories of a woman who was independent and dynamic and wanted to do things her way
Mm-hmm.
and way ahead of her time. And the trouble sometimes she would get into, but also how she would get out of that kind of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the good trouble
Good
that John
trouble.
Lewis spoke
Yes.
about, so that was one source. The second source was a mystery about Zora Neale Hurston herself, because when she went to Haiti, all of her field work, the notebooks where anthropologists record their work,
Mm-hmm.
those don't exist for her time in Haiti. No
Mm.
one knows where they are. We don't know if they were destroyed after her death, because
Mm-hmm.
some papers were missing from her house. She was in a rental. Someone was moving things. Someone was starting to burn papers. And
Mm.
a neighbor came by and said, "No, you can't do that." The person who lived here was a writer and took those papers and salvaged them. So
Wow.
if someone knows where Zora's notebook from Haiti is, please let me know. But
Yes.
I looked and I contacted biographers, specialists, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
No one had the answer. So what I had was a handful of letters
Mm-hmm.
from Zora, especially to the Guggenheim Foundation,
Mm-hmm.
because she had a fellowship and they were sponsoring her to study traditional religious practices
Mm-hmm.
in Haiti and Jamaica. So she went to
Wow.
Jamaica first, and then she went to Haiti
Then
in the
Haiti.
fall of 1936. And that's a lot of the setting for my novel. But there's Lucille's life before that. But Lucille goes to work for Zora Neale Hurston. So the mystery of what happened to Zora was another source for this novel. I wanted
Hmm.
to know, because when a gap exists, the
Yes.
imagination wants to fill it. So,
Absolutely. And it
and then the
does.
the third source was my firsthand experience with activists in Haiti.
Mm.
So, especially one who was later awarded the Goldman Environmental Prize for
Mm.
his work on behalf of small farmers and against the kind of land grab and the kind
Mm-hmm.
of subsidized imports that were hurting people who were
Mm-hmm.
trying to really just find dignified ways of making their way in the world. And he
Yes.
stood up to the forces that were against that. So I had the honor of watching his work and
Mm.
going to the 30th anniversary of the Papai Peasant Movement, which
Mm.
is the name of the group that he led. And in that time, watching him, I thought what I saw would come out in nonfiction. So I did write
Mm-hmm.
an essay about this, but then I started to realize, no, I'm also interested in Zora's time, and no one knows anything about that.
Yes.
And Zora mentioned in her epigraph to her book on Haiti that there was a Haitian woman named Lucille who helped her and who she loved and who was a dear friend.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, I want to know about Lucille. I couldn't
Yes.
find anything on
Ah,
Lucille. There was no information. So
nothing.
the real Lucille became sort of an inspiration because nothing is documented about her life.
Mm.
And I thought of my great grandmother and I thought
Yes.
of her being Lucille, and
Yes.
that's how it came apart. I mean, that's how the book came together. And of course, with the qualities of this activist and others who also worked and who were behind the scenes, because not everyone, obviously is leading. There were people often. I would find that the women who were cooking, they were in the back, and they would make these salads that were beautiful and
Mm.
elaborate. And the salad would have a peace sign made out of
Ah,
beets or
yes.
something. There would be
Yes.
some visual element to the salad. So I wanted to go back and find the person doing this and say, thank you for doing this. And I couldn't find her. And it was the
Mm.
same thing. I couldn't find any information about Lucille. I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't find what happened to Zora in this time.
Yeah.
And I was finding myself dedicated to sort of imagining what these lost or untold stories would be. And that's
Yes.
how it came about, really.
It's so beautiful that you're able to weave these pieces together based on your own roots, your great
Yes,
grandmother, and then these other figures who were
yes,
doing a really important work in Haiti. But
yes,
sadly, but not surprisingly, their stories, their writing, their materials have been lost. It's
yes.
yes, and you're at least imagine what their lives could have been or what their stories could have been to preserve their names.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the key to that is to realize that Zora Neale Hurston is
Hmm.
very well known for her writing,
Yes.
and she wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God when she
Hmm.
was in Haiti.
The
So she
story.
wrote her masterpiece in Haiti. She started her memoir in Haiti, and
Hmm.
she wrote a beautiful hybrid book about anthropology, but from a completely different point of view
Hmm.
in Haiti. She started all of that. So
Hmm.
it was one of her most creative periods in her life,
Yeah.
partly because she had a fellowship. So, Virginia
Right.
Woolf's A Room of One's Own, she
Yes.
had that. Plus, she had Lucille helping her. So, in my mind, I thought of Lucille as more than a domestic. Lucille
Yes.
became a friend, and Lucille was almost helping. And in the research, she was helping Zora
Hmm.
navigates some pretty dangerous situations. So that's how I imagined it. And,
Yes.
there's no way of testing that because we don't have that information, but it just got me started and kept me going.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like it was a big source of inspiration for you to imagine her contributions, because I'm sure there were
Absolutely.
many, as many women who worked
Exactly.
in those roles.
Exactly. And it's like
Yeah.
saying thank you to
Mm.
a young woman who made something beautiful for a salad for
Yes.
a group of people and not being able to find that person. My mother's stories of my great grandmother, I thought she was a market woman and she created beautiful things. Sometimes they
Yes.
were little dresses, sometimes they were carvings. So she would sell her own things that she created.
Mm-hmm.
So my Lucille is a carver, and that's her way of expressing her creativity. And I also imagined her as an HSP, though I don't say that.
Yes.
She, to me, has that quality.
I was thinking that because she's
Mm-hmm.
finding these subtle but powerful ways to express her voice and her message.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's such a reminder
Absolutely.
for us, even present day, to how can we find those ways to express and advocate?
And I think too, in creating fiction, so because this is not autobiographical, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people, when they write the first novel, it's autobiographical. So everyone says, did this really happen to you? And which part is true, which part is not?
Mm-hmm.
In creating this character, what I did was take the connection she has to the natural world and the sensitivity she has to it and turn it into a situation where she can hear the Mapou tree, which is the tree that's on the cover of the book, and it's a sacred tree within Haitian culture, and she can hear it singing. So
Mm-hmm.
that there is this connection to the natural world that is much closer than most people would have. And then she also has dreams that are sometimes prescient.
Mm.
So some people would say, okay, that is magical realism. Other people would say, no, that's just someone who is connected to her own highly attuned awareness
Mm-hmm.
of the world, paying attention. But I
Mm-hmm.
would say that I saw her almost as an enchanted, but also a warrior, an enchanted
Mm-hmm.
character. At the same time, she's an eco feminist warrior.
Mm-hmm. I mean, she's so powerful in how she shows up and how she supports Zora. But yeah, there's
Yes.
all these subtle layers of sensitivity, connection to the natural world, her dream life, her attunements,
Yes. And the
her, the
carving.
carving, and just that
Yes.
warrior, right? That
Thank you for,
that focus on justice, right?
yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
In a
And
non-obvious way, though.
yes, that's
Yeah.
absolutely true. And also, because I see this novel as being about different kinds of love.
Mm-hmm.
It's the love of the tree, the love of the memory of a mother she never knew, but
Yes.
feels through the tree. the mother tree, if you want.
Yes.
There's the love of other parts of the natural world. There's the love of the father and daughter, of carving as an expressive form, of her best friend Fifina, of learning, of the teaching that goes on through Sister Gilberte. There's the love of, the first love, the romantic love of Oreste. And there's the love of independence, of wanting to be able to be in the marketplace and have her work sold there and have
Yes.
independence for money. There's the love even between her and Zora that develops. It didn't start that way. It starts with mistrust, but in the, I don't want spoiler alert, I don't want to give the ending away,
Sure.
but it's a book about different kinds of love. And in the end, of course, it's the love we have for each other when we don't treat each other as others and when we
Yes.
imagine each other's inner lives and take the time to really see and hear each other.
Yeah, it sounds like such a beautiful unfolding and building to trust, and then how the relationship, I mean, I imagine,
Yes.
filters out to others and makes a big imprint. And
Yes,
still is.
I mean, the point too that I wanted to make was that
Mm-hmm.
it starts with the othering. It really does,
The
because,
othering. Yeah.
the American is there and the American represents the occupiers. So even though
Yes.
Zora is a Black woman, she is still from the United
Ah,
States.
right.
And Lucille has and is told by other people, okay, this is what Americans are, and just don't trust them. And
Mm-hmm.
Zora's coming in and thinking, okay, is Lucille someone who's going to help me, or is she actually perhaps spying on me for people who don't want me to do this kind of research? So there's a lot of intrigue in that, but
Yes.
it's based on the othering that's immediate from being fed certain information and lies about people that we may meet and confront.
It's true. Would it be safe to say they're othering each other then?
Absolutely,
Yes.
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 Yes, it's funny to,
Mm-hmm.
the word when I first heard othering, I thought, well, I don't know if I like that. But then I thought, I understand it completely. So I'm going to use
Mm-hmm.
it, but it's a perfectly well used verb when it describes that process where
Mm-hmm.
you refuse to accord someone else the same kind of, you know, whether it's sensitivity, whether it's imagination,
Mm-hmm.
art, love, rich inner life, dreams,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, you refuse to accord that individual the same thing that you
Absolutely.
yourself are experiencing.
Right. And put them in a box and really
Yep,
miss the essence of who they are as an
absolutely.
individual.
Deny
Yeah.
the essence, deny
Deny the
that there is.
essence.
Yes, that's the most extreme form, is when you deny that there's even an individual and it's simply a group. It's almost like a
Yes.
faceless group. And that can happen very easily.
Mm-hmm. Oh, very easily.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes. Instantly.
yeah.
And so then these two women, they get to really know each other and
Yes. And
soften
go
that.
through things, but
Yes.
don't want to give away the end.
That's right, right. We want folks to read I can't wait to read this book. Just
Oh,
every
good.
I know it's not my story, but there's things that you're saying that I can relate to so deeply, and I think a lot of sensitive folks
Yes.
will, whether
Yes. I
whatever
really
their
think so.
background is. Absolutely.
Yes.
And I can tell this is clearly deeply personal to you, and sounds like part of finding your own voice is telling
Yes,
this story. Yeah.
absolutely. And
Mhm.
also finding my own voice and finding, because I did so much research that there
Mm-hmm.
was a point where I had to say to myself, it's okay to unshackle yourself
Mm.
from the facts.
Yes.
This is not history. You are
That's
not
right.
trying to write. You can let yourself go. And when I started to do that, I enjoyed the process so much more. And I like using elements from all the senses when I write, but I felt like I could fill in so much more: the scent of something, the taste of something, how something
Mm.
feels. And that became very important to the poems that make up this novel. So
Mm.
someone said to me, there's a lot of food in there. I said, good. And you notice it. Yes. Or you smell something. I want
Yes.
you to feel that you are inhabiting the world fully.
Oh,
and all
how
your senses
beautiful.
are involved.
Mm-hmm. And we wouldn't think about a book being a fully sensory experience, but you're absolutely, it
Hmm.
could evoke all of those
Yes.
pieces. Oh, I love it.
Yes. That's what you try. That's what I try to do. So I hope in some, if I manage in a few poems to do that, I'll pat myself on the back. But
Absolutely.
as you're writing the poem, and for any poet, the struggle is to find that balance between finding the right words, but it's a novel. So you're also keeping the story moving forward. So these two things are in tension.
Mm,
One is slow down and find that right word and let someone savor it. And the
mm,
next is make someone want to read the next poem so that
mm.
they find out, okay, what's going on? Keeping that movement. So it was a challenge. I enjoyed it, but that it's not easy to do.
Not easy at all, but I can tell you
No.
put so much care into the reader's experience and helping them kind of go on the journey with you.
Oh, well, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
That's what I felt. And, in the same way that my mother was a great storyteller, she was
Mm-hmm.
my first and best storyteller. What
Mm.
I would try to do is imagine the way that she, especially in certain poems, the way that she would tell this. And it just would, it flowed from there
Yes.
sometimes. Sometimes it didn't, but sometimes it did.
I appreciate how your mother is the through line in our conversation today.
Yes,
It's
she
really
is.
beautiful. Yeah, can
And
feel it.
yeah, it's very powerful.
Mm.
And dedicating the novel to her,
Mm.
especially because she so believed in me and
Ah,
my ability to do it. And there were years that I just couldn't turn to the novel because of
yeah.
health things,
Mm.
especially, but also other, just financial reasons. But
Sure.
she always believed that I would do it and that I could do it. So,
Yeah,
and
you
my father
have.
too, both my
Mm-hmm.
parents.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, because it's mainly my mother's stories,
Yes.
yeah,
You've carried them on. It's really beautiful.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Well, Nadine, before we wrap up, I'm wondering if there's a message you could leave our HSP listeners with. What would that be?
Absolutely. It comes from a poet. Her name is Jane Hirschfield. I don't know if you know her work.
Mm-hmm.
She's, I guess, studied as a Buddhist, but just writes the most amazing poetry. And I had the good fortune to be in a workshop with her. And the first thing she told us, we thought she was going to talk about some technical aspect of poetry. And no, she told us to slow down,
Mm-hmm.
pay attention, and see how everything is connected.
Ooh,
And I love that.
love that.
So, especially in moments of pain or fear and overwhelm
Yeah.
that can happen, I try to remember those words. And that would be the advice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we can call that advice, I guess. Yeah. But sharing those words and then also practice self compassion,
Yes, absolutely.
learn about it, practice it.
Mm-hmm. I think it's such an essential practice for every sensitive person, for every human,
Yes,
really.
yes, yes, but
Yes,
even more so. Yeah,
for us sensitives,
yes,
yes. And I think we are so suited to that. We absolutely need to slow down as sensitive people. But yeah, we are
yes,
so gifted at seeing the interconnection of life and everything in it.
yes, yes.
Let's
But then
let's
the
take a
people
moment.
pleasing, can come
Yes,
out too.
gets
So
in the way.
can get in the way, and then the perfectionism and people pleasing are often closely related. I've noticed
Mm-hmm.
that I'll speak for myself in that.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something else that I had to let go and say,
Yes,
this won't please everyone. This is a story that some people won't feel is of
mm-hmm.
interest to them, and that's okay.
That's okay.
It says if I had a restaurant and I have 10 tables, and if you don't like my cooking, that's all right.
That's okay.
It's
There
all
are a lot
right.
of other restaurants.
There are other places. I understand. We have
Ex-
different tastes. It's fine. But yeah,
exactly.
but
But
that took a while to get there.
it does. It's definitely a process.
Yeah.
But when you allow yourself to be who you are, you get to write books like When the Mapou Sings, this deeply immersive story that's going to be really impactful for the right person.
Oh,
And I
thank
think
you.
for a
I
lot of
think,
sensitive people.
yeah. I hope so, because it helped me. It
Mm-hmm.
actually helped me become the kind of person who could finish that novel.
Yes.
And
Yes.
yeah,
And here you are on the other side.
the other side. There's a lot to do on the other side. I didn't know that, but
There's more.
whoa, yeah.
Well,
Yes, there's a
Nadine, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. I really appreciate
oh,
everything that you share with
thank
us and
you.
letting us into your writing journey and into your life
Thank
story
you.
a bit. And I will definitely be sharing your book and your other resources for
Wonderful.
folks.
And thank you for what you're doing
Thank
and
you.
for your podcast and
Thank you.
for just creating space and creating ways that we feel more empowered.
Mm, thank
It's
you.
really important. Thank you.